Our first story comes from Jara Murrumbidgee, a Wiradjuri man who faced a nightmare in the Murrumbidgee River wetlands of rural New South Wales in the winter of 2023. I've always had a pull to the river. Grew up spearing fish and tracking roos along the Murrumbidgee, the water's pulse echoing my own. My nan used to say the river knew your name before you knew your own. At 30, I was stuck, spending my days elbow deep in busted engines at the mechanic shop in Nargun, watching mates get married or move on while I spun in place. One night, tired of the stink of oil and broken promises, I grabbed my swag, my spear, a torch, and lit out toward the Murrumbidgee wetlands for a solo camp. That part of New South Wales, Wiradjuri country, holds more than mud and eucalypts. It holds stories, ghost-thick places where water remembers. My nan told me the Bunyip lived in the billabongs, dragging the lost and foolish down with a song only the dying could hear. I laughed at it when I was young, just one of Nan's yarns to keep me from swimming out too far. Turns out, stories stay because something makes them stick. I hiked in at dusk, the gums catching fire in the sunset, trunks glowing gold above the low fog. Frogs croaked like bad drummers. The air smelled of damp bark and distant rain. I set my camp high on a grassy rise, overlooking a dark billabong edged in reeds, water still as death. Built my fire, cooked damper in foil, and chewed slow under the stars. The wind whispered like Nan's breath when she'd sing old Wiradjuri lullabies. "Jara, you're a bush legend," I said, half laughing into the night. But the wetlands had other plans. I woke sometime after midnight. The fire was dying, the cold biting. Then I heard it, a cry, low and long. Not a bird, not a roo, not anything I'd heard before. It sounded like a child, lost and scared. It tugged something deep in my chest, made my bones ache with dread. "Just a fox, mate," I muttered, heart pounding. But the sound wasn't coming from the trees. It came from the billabong. I stepped out of the swag, grabbed my torch and spear, and walked slowly toward the water's edge. The reeds swayed like they were breathing. I swept the light across the surface, black water reflecting the moon, silent. Then it rippled. Something moved beneath. The wail changed, guttural now, thick and wet, like a dog choking on a bone. I froze. "Don't be a bloody idiot, Jara," I whispered, tightening my grip on the spear. Then it called my name. Jara. My stomach flipped. The voice was wrong, thick, wet, ancient, like mud trying to speak. Nan's warning thundered in my head. The Bunyip calls with a voice like grief. Don't follow the sound, don't answer it. "Real creative using my name," I said, torch trembling in my hand. Then the water broke. A shape emerged, long and low, rising slow like it was made of the riverbed itself. It had the head of something part dog, part horse, its skin hanging in wet clumps, yellow eyes glowing like coals. Its tusks jutted sideways, slick with muck. It moved without sound, flippers churning water, tail cutting reeds. I stumbled back. The cry hit again, louder, this time in my chest, like it wanted to replace my heartbeat. I remembered Nan's story. She said the Bunyip was old as the land, and blood might appease it. I fumbled with my knife, nicked my thumb, and let the blood drip into the dirt. "Take this," I whispered, "leave me be." For a moment, the water calmed. The Bunyip stilled, its eyes locked on mine. Then its jaws parted, revealing teeth like smashed coral. I backed away, spear raised. The thing hissed, then lunged.
Water exploded, and I dove behind a gum, the bark tearing as something massive slammed into it. My heart thudded in my ears. I spotted a dry branch, yanked my lighter from my pocket, and lit it. The flame flared. I swung the fire like a torch. "Back off!" I shouted, voice shaking.
The bunyip shrieked, a sound like steel scraping bone, and reeled from the flame. Smoke curled in its eyes. I ran, the burning stick my only shield, crashing through reeds, mud sucking at my boots. I scrambled up a ridge, rocks jagged, trees sparse. There, half buried in lichen, was a sandstone slab carved with fish, spirals, lines like waves. A Wiradjuri marker. I dropped to my knees, pressed my bloody thumb to the carving, and whispered a prayer Nan had taught me. The stone pulsed, warm, alive. Below, in the billabong, the water churned but didn't rise. I looked down and saw something poking from the mud, white, worn, unmistakably human. A bone. It was a femur, snapped in half, deep bite marks scoring the length of it. I touched it, and something cold whispered in my ear, not from outside, but inside my head. Run. Not mine, not Nan's. I stared at the bone. Someone else had come here. Someone who didn't leave. Below, the bunyip circled, massive shape cutting through the water. It cried again, softer this time, beckoning, like it wanted to bargain. I stayed on the ridge, clutching the fire stick as it burned down. The carvings glowed faintly. I began to chant Wiradjuri words Nan used during her river blessings. My voice cracked, dry from fear and smoke. The bunyip didn't rise again. It circled, waited, watched. The sky turned gray. The first light of dawn peeled across the water. The river fell still. The wail stopped. I limped back to camp in silence. Everything was trashed. Tent slashed open, spear snapped, claw marks raked into the dirt. My swag had been dragged a few meters. I found it resting at the water's edge, open, like something had been sniffing around inside. I didn't sleep, just packed up and hiked out fast, not stopping until I hit gravel and phone reception. Back in Narandera, I burned eucalyptus leaves in a steel bowl out the back of the house. Let the smoke curl through every corner of me. Man used to do that when people came back from bad places. I stood in it for a long time, eyes shut. I went to her grave that afternoon, sat there for an hour and whispered, "You were right." Now, I don't camp near the Murrumbidgee, not even for a birthday. I stick to engines. Oil doesn't whisper your name in the dark. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind comes from the south, the house groans, and beneath it, real soft, like a child in the reeds, I swear I hear a voice. Jara. And I keep my knife close. Our second story comes from Tarni Wren, a Kamilaroi woman who faced a terror in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales in the spring of 2022. I'm a bushwalker through and through. The eucalyptus sting and jagged ridgelines of Kamilaroi country are my heartbeat. Nothing resets me like getting dust on my boots and mist in my lungs. At 27, I was living in Katoomba, working as a barista, slinging flat whites for tourists who thought misty mornings in kookaburras were a novelty. I was licking my wounds from a gut punch breakup. 3 years gone in 3 texts. I needed space, I needed silence, I needed something ancient and honest. So I packed light, rucksack, a billy for tea, a tin of sardines, my tarp, and my boomerang, carved by my grandfather, handed down when I turned 18. It was more of a keepsake than a weapon, but you never know, right? I planned a solo hike through the Blue Mountains, thick with fog, ghosts, and old songs. The sandstone cliffs and hanging swamps hum in a way that gets into your teeth. If you listen too long, you feel like the land is talking under its breath. My Uncle Jack always said, "Don't go wandering sacred places alone, not unless you know the proper songs, not unless you're walking with respect." He used to talk about the Yowie, a hairy giant that lives deep in the bush. Not a cuddly ape either. He said it crushed bones and screamed like a banshee when angered. "Guard of the old paths," he'd say, tapping his temple. "He don't like trespassers." At the time, I thought he was trying to keep me close to home. Turns out, the forests got a heavier step than mine. I hit the trail at dawn. The gum trees were silver with dew, and lyrebirds mimicked distant traffic and phone alarms like bush tricksters. The air was crisp, laced with damp bark, peppermints, and bursts of wildflower. I felt alive, like the land was cracking open to welcome me home. I followed a ridgeline down into a gully, crossed a dry creek bed, and set up camp in a little bowl surrounded by sheer cliffs and twisted snow gums. A narrow stream trickled past, carving shallow patterns into the stone. The rocks glowed ochre in the sunlight, almost pulsing with warmth. I boiled water over a small fire, brewed eucalyptus tea, and sat back on a folded tarp. "Tarni, you're a bloody legend," I muttered, taking a sip, the heat hitting the back of my throat just right. The bush wrapped around me like a friend. Wind in the gums, water murmuring through roots. It felt sacred. But that night, the mountains growled. I woke just after midnight, heart pounding. A thud had jolted me awake, deep, rhythmic, like a boulder dropped from a great height, again and again. The dirt under my swag vibrated, each impact getting closer. The air had changed. It was foul, like wet fur, rotting bark, and old blood. I gagged, trying not to breathe through my nose. "Just a wallaby," I muttered, but the bush had gone dead silent. No frogs, no wind, not even leaves brushing. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. I sat up slowly, grabbed the torch and my boomerang, the carved patterns rough in my hand. I scanned the trees. Another thud, closer. Then something growled. Not the kind of growl you get from a dingo. This was low, deeper than anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't sound, it was vibration. It shook my chest, made my teeth hurt, like a didgeridoo played wrong. And then, from beyond the firelight, something stepped forward. It was tall, taller than any human, at least 8, maybe 9 feet, hunched, wide like a cattle truck. Its fur hung in mats, slick and tangled with bits of bark and moss. Its face, I don't even know how to describe it. Not quite ape, not quite human. Eyes like burning coals, red, orange, and alive, set deep in that face like hot iron in mud. It looked like the bush had tried to make a person and gave up halfway. And then it said my name. Tarni. A voice like rocks breaking apart in a landslide. My knees went to jelly. "Fancy knowing my name, mate," I croaked, trying to bluff. My voice shook like a possum in a flood. It stepped closer. Its arms were massive, swinging low, claws curved and black. I raised the torch. Its fur gleamed wet. Its stench hit me like a punch, rot and soil and old anger. I took a step back, heart hammering. Then I remembered Uncle Jack's words. If you ever face something you can't fight, you honor the land, Dance it, sing it, that's how you stay alive. I dropped to my knees, pulled out my red ochre stick from the side pocket, smeared it on my hands. Then I stood, shaking, and started to dance. Not well, my steps were rough and half forgotten, but they were real. I stomped a spiral into the dirt with my boot heel, humming the song I'd been taught as a kid during Kamalarowi ceremony, a song of protection, a song to call ancestors close. The Yowie stopped, its head tilted, its eyes narrowed. The ochre on the ground started to glow, faint like embers under ash. It snarled, stepped forward, but hesitated at the spiral. I kept dancing. My legs burned, my breath was ragged. I could feel the land under me pulsing, alive. The Yowie roared, a sound like a cliff collapsing into itself, but it didn't cross the spiral. It circled, watching. It raked a gum tree with one claw, sending strips of bark flying. One piece sliced across my shoulder. I hissed, blood soaking through my flannel. Lousy shot, Harry! Then I saw it. A sandstone overhang, maybe 20 meters up the gully wall, marked with Kamilaroi carvings. Stars, tracks, lines like rivers. Old signs, sacred signs, maybe even a guardian mark. I backed toward it, keeping the spiral between me and the thing, still dancing, still singing. My voice cracked. The torch trembled in my hand. The carvings caught the light and glowed. Faint at first, then stronger, warm under my palm when I reached them. The Yowie roared again. It hurled a rock the size of a football, missing me by inches. The air shook with the impact. I smeared ochre on the carvings, traced my fingers through the lines, and sang louder. Something answered. Not the beast, the land. The ground trembled, not from the Yowie, but from below, like the earth was waking up. The spiral shimmered brighter. The carvings pulsed with red light. The Yowie howled, stepping back, its edges starting to blur like smoke in wind. It paced the edge of the spiral, claws twitching, furious, but it didn't cross, couldn't. I danced until I couldn't feel my feet, until my lungs burned, until my hands bled from pressing into the stone. The Yowie's eyes dimmed, then vanished into mist. The air cleared, just like that. I stood there until dawn, shivering, drained. The mist rolled in gold and quiet. No thuds, no growls, just birdsong. The carvings were cool again. The spiral was ash. I limped back to camp. My tarp was shredded, the billy flattened. Trees nearby were clawed deep, sap oozing like blood. My boots were soaked in mud. I packed up and didn't speak a word until I hit the edge of town. Back in Katoomba, I made a promise. I wouldn't walk sacred ground again without knowing the right songs, without honoring it properly. I started going to community gatherings, learning more dances, more language. My uncle smiled when I told him. He said, "Now you're walking right." I don't hike the Blue Mountains alone anymore. Coffee's safer. Lattes don't growl your name. But when the bush goes quiet, when the mist hangs low and the gums start to hum, I keep my ochre close and my boomerang closer. Our third story comes from Marnie Jara, a Yawuru woman who faced a nightmare in the Kimberley region of Western Australia in the summer of 2024. I'm a saltwater girl, born chasing crabs and fishing the mangroves where the ocean kisses Yawuru country. At 32, I was a tour guide in Broome, burned out from herding tourists through sacred sites, repeating the same stories, seeing flashbulbs go off where quiet was needed. It was a good gig on paper, but something was missing in me. The land felt farther away. So I packed my swag, a fishing spear, and a single water bottle, just the essentials, and went bush along the Fitzroy River to find silence, maybe hear something that wasn't a camera shutter or a tourist's complaint about flies. The Kimberley's all red dirt, gorges and rivers that pulse like veins, old country, and loud in its own way if you listen right. The kind of land that remembers you and demands you remember it back. My auntie always said the Rainbow Serpent lived there, a creator and guardian spirit, winding through waterways and stories both. Respect the river girl, she'd tell me. Don't take without asking. Don't forget to sing thanks. At the time, I smiled, nodded. I thought it was just one of those yarns meant to keep kids polite and quiet near deep water. Turns out, the river's got a shimmer that bites. I rolled in around midday. Sun was blazing. The kind of heat that warps the air into waves and roasts the ground beneath your boots. Boab trees stood like fat, ancient sentinels along the banks, their trunks cracked and swollen like they'd been holding their breath for centuries. The Fitzroy shimmered, brown and wide and slow, but not lazy. It was the kind of slow that watches. I felt it. The air was thick, scented with salt and silt and dry gum leaf. But I felt grounded, like I was home. I set up my swag on a sandy rise not far from the water, where the breeze could still reach me, and the hum of the river mixed with cicadas like a lullaby. I speared a fat bream before dusk, gutted it, skewered it on a green stick, and grilled it over a small campfire I dug out with a heel. "Marnie, you're queen of the bush," I said, laughing to myself as the skin blistered and popped. The smoke curled upwards, dragging the scent of fish and earth into the stars. Night fell, velvet black, with stars so bright they hurt to look at. I was calm, safe, full belly, warm fire, river lullaby. What else could I want? But that night, the Kimberley woke angry. I jolted awake just after midnight to a ripple, no, a tremor, not from above, but beneath me. My swag vibrated like something was moving deep under the sand. Not an earthquake, more like the river had turned over in its sleep and was dreaming bad things. The air was sharp now, electric, like the few seconds before lightning cracks the sky. A low hum rose in my bones, vibrating the fillings in my teeth. I sat up fast, grabbed my spear, heart punching like a goanna caught in a trap. "Just the wind, yeah?" I whispered, blinking into the dark. Then I saw it. The river glowed. Not moonlight, not torchlight, but a deep, unnatural shimmer, green, gold, blue, like oil on water, but thicker, more alive. It churned, slapping the banks in strange, slow waves, like something beneath was rising. I flicked on my torch, and the beam caught it, water twisting into shapes, scales, eyes, a serpent's curve undulating in slow motion. My breath caught, my skin turned to ice, and I knew this wasn't a dream. "Okay, Marnie," I whispered, "don't lose your shit." Auntie's stories came rushing back, stories I'd laughed at, stories I'd rolled my eyes through, stories about the Rainbow Serpent who shaped the rivers, laid down the law, guarded sacred waters, and punished those who disrespected them. I'd caught that bream. I hadn't sung thanks. The water parted, slow and reverent, and up rose a head, massive, scaled, glittering like it had swallowed the sun. Its eyes were golden fire, its body iridescent, wrapped in shimmering light. The Rainbow Serpent. It wasn't a story anymore. It hummed my name, Marnie, in a voice too big for the world, a voice like thunder over water. I fell to my knees. legs jelly, spear shaking in my hand. "Big fan of my name, eh?" I croaked, half laughing, half sobbing. The serpent rose taller, coiling, filling the entire stretch of river. Its tail thrushed the mangroves behind me, and a wall of mud and leaves smacked into my camp. My fire sputtered out, my fish bones scattered. The world had turned electric. I remembered what Auntie said. Yawuru apology songs, sung with respect, could calm old spirits. And I had wronged the water. I dropped the spear, pressed my palms to the sand, and started humming. A sorry song, not polished, not perfect, but from the gut, the kind passed down in kitchens, not classrooms. The air pulsed with the sound, and I kept my head down, throat burning, heart near bursting. The serpent's hum matched mine, still powerful, but softer now, like it was listening. But the anger wasn't gone. Its scales rippled, water surged, the riverbank shifted as if it were being rewritten, a divine tantrum. Then the serpent lunged, jaws wide, a tidal wave rising. I flung myself behind the nearest boab tree, the trunk vibrating with power, the air sharp with ozone and river mist. "Lousy aim, Shiny!" I yelled without thinking, coughing on sand and fear. Through blurred eyes, I spotted a rocky outcrop upstream. Something about it glowed faintly, even through the madness. I bolted toward it, dodging branches and whipping debris, feet pounding slick mud. The outcrop was carved. Waves, spirals, snakes, law lines etched deep into the stone. Sacred, a memory. I slapped both hands on it, still humming my broken song. The carvings warmed under my touch. The rainbow serpent reared back, eyes locked on mine, fire and fury in twin suns. But it hesitated. The carvings glowed brighter. The hum in my head changed. I didn't know the words, but my body moved with them, an old rhythm, one that felt buried in my bones. The river slowed, the glow dimmed, not gone, but watching. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my fishing spear, my pride, and walked back to the river's edge, heart thudding. I raised it high and then hurled it into the water. A sacrifice, an apology. The serpent's golden eyes followed it as it sank, the water swallowing the offering with a final shimmer. The hum faded, the glow sank. The Fitzroy returned to its muddy brown silence, the surface calm once more. I stayed still for a long time. My voice was gone, the song used up. My body ached. My camp was wrecked, swag drenched, gear flung, the sand torn like something clawed its way through. The fire pit was a muddy soup. The riverbank was new, reshaped by something older than memory. By dawn, the Kimberley looked the same as it ever did, red, wide, quiet, but I was not. I hiked out, silent, barefoot, felt right to let the land touch me raw. When I got back to Broome, I quit the tours. I didn't want to guide strangers through sacred ground anymore. I started teaching Yawuru kids instead. Songs, dances, respect. Not in a school, on the beach, by the mangroves, where the land could hear us. The rainbow serpent let me go, but its ripple still hums in my sleep. A warning, a second chance. I don't camp by the Fitzroy anymore. Tourists are safer. They don't hum your name. But when the river shimmers, I sing, I remember, and my hands stay empty.
Our fourth story comes from Kira Kunmanara, a Beninj woman who faced a horror in Arnhem Land, Northern Territory, during the dry season of 2023. I'm a rock art nerd, always have been. Give me pigment stains and weather-worn escarpments over a phone screen any day. I grew up tracing the stories on Beninj country, sketching alongside my grandfather as he whispered the meanings behind each ochre line. At 29, I was working as a ranger out of Jabiru, mostly pushing paperwork and guiding tourists who couldn't tell a kangaroo track from a coffee stain. I was burnt out, tired of reminding folks not to touch sacred sites, tired of watching cigarette butts pile up near ancient paintings. So I packed light: a sketchbook, a water canteen, a pocket knife, and my ochre kit, and headed out solo to a remote rock shelter I'd heard whispers about, one that hadn't been catalogued yet. Arnhem Land is like nowhere else. Rugged sandstone outcrops rise like bones from the Spinifex plains, and the air carries more than heat, it carries memory. The escarpments hum with old stories, the land watching, listening. Before I left, my grandfather, old but sharp as ever, gave me a stern look. "Don't mock the Mimmies," he warned. "You laugh at their art, you vanish." Mimmy spirits, tall, reed-thin beings said to live in cracks and caves, were tricksters and guardians of rock art. I thought it was an old yarn meant to stop kids from doodling over sacred lines. Turns out, the rocks have voices, and they don't like to be ignored. I set out before sunrise, the world still cool and painted pink by the early light. Cockatoos wheeled overhead, squawking their rude greetings, and the sweet scent of cockadoo plums hung on the breeze. I trekked through the Spinifex with my boots kicking up red dust, feeling like I was walking straight into a dreaming. When I reached the shelter around midday, the sight stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a shallow cave under a cliff face, and the walls inside were alive with ancient paintings. Fish, turtles, kangaroos, but also tall, strange stick-like figures drawn with dizzying precision. The Mimmies. They danced across the stone like they were mid-motion, mid-sentence. I set up my tarp for shade, lit a tiny fire far from the walls so I wouldn't smoke out the paintings, and began sketching. The lines tugged at me, familiar but unsettling. Some figures seemed to shift when I looked too long, arms stretched too far, eyes angled oddly. Still, I was in my zone, pencil gliding across the paper, my tea boiling softly beside me. "Kira, you're living the dream," I muttered. That night, I nestled into my swag, the still air hugging me like a second skin. Until it turned. Sometime past midnight, I woke to a strange sound. A hiss, sharp and high, like knives dragged against sandstone. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't any animal I knew. The air had changed too, thickened. My skin tingled, the way it does just before a storm. My swag felt too tight, the shelter too shallow. I reached for my pocket knife, whispering, "Just the bush, yeah?" But the silence around me was tight and unnatural, like the whole land was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Voices. Not one, not two, dozens. A chorus of whispers, high and fast, circling me. Some giggled like children, others muttered low like old men chewing over bad memories. They all said the same thing, over and over. Kira. The way they said it made my stomach twist. My name didn't sound like mine anymore. I flicked on my torch, and the beam landed on the cave wall. The paintings twitched. Not metaphorically, not the way art seems to move in firelight. They moved. Figures blurred and shimmered, arms shifting, eyes widening. The Mimmies, they were awake. I bolted upright, knife in one hand, torch in the other. "Okay, Kira, don't be a goose," I hissed, trying to steady my breath. That's when one of the shadows peeled off the wall. Tall, too thin, moving wrong. its joints bent backwards. Its eyes were 2 pinprick stars.
The whispers grew sharp, slicing through my head. I felt them urging me, pulling at my thoughts. "Touch the wall," they said without words. "Add your mark. Join us." "Nice try, art critics," I spat, but my voice wavered. My sketchbook lay open beside the fire, my drawings of their sacred images. I'd sketched without asking. I'd made a copy. That was the mistake. My grandfather's voice rang in my head. Always ask, always offer something in return. I dropped to my knees, digging through my ochre kit with shaking hands. I found a flat stone near the cave mouth and smeared it red with crushed ochre. With trembling fingers, I painted a fish, a symbol of life, of respect. "I'm sorry," I whispered in Bininj. "I shouldn't have sketched without asking." I placed the stone down with both hands and backed away slowly. The whispers dipped lower, not gone, but hesitant. The shadow figures paced the edge of the shelter, eyes flickering like dying stars. One lunged, its arm slashing the air beside my cheek. I felt the cold radiating from it like dry ice. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own swag. My torchlight caught movement at the edge of the shelter. Beyond the firelight, the shadows of the escarpment had shifted. Shapes stood where there should be none, tall, watching. I ran, torch swinging, boots thudding against the stone. A short way up the ridge was a boulder I remembered passing, a sacred stone carved with Bininj symbols. Hands, lines, spirit figures. I threw myself against it, my ochre-stained palm pressing into a handprint that looked just like mine. The stone was warm, not from the sun, from something older. I whispered apologies again, drawing breathless songs between panicked sobs. My ochre fingers painted a second fish, this time over the old carving, blending my line with theirs. The whispers faltered again. The shadow figures twitched, frozen between choices. One stepped forward, and the stone flared with light. Not blinding, but soft and steady. The kind of glow that feels like memory. The cave behind me groaned. The paintings twisted and buckled, shadows clawing at the edges. But they couldn't cross the ridge where I knelt. They howled, high, sharp, angry, but distant, like wind tunneling through a didgeridoo. The boulder hummed beneath me, and I stayed there, whispering the old songs my grandfather taught me, voice cracking from cold and fear. I don't know how long I stayed. The sky had paled when I finally stood up, the orange wash of dawn creeping over the land. The mimmies were gone. The air was light again. My torch was nearly dead, and my hands were caked in red. I returned to camp and found everything as I left it, but the cave was different. The paintings were still, clearer, sharper, as though they'd been repainted in the night. I didn't dare enter again. I packed up my things and hiked back in silence, my footsteps lighter, reverent. Back in Jabiru, I resigned from the public tours. Now I work behind the scenes, mapping sacred sites, keeping them secret, keeping them safe. I don't draw at shelters anymore, not without asking, not without offering. The mimmies still whisper in my dreams. Sometimes they call my name, sometimes they sing. But I know now it's not always malice, it's memory, it's law. I don't visit the remote shelters anymore. Admin work's dull, sure, but forms don't hiss your name in the dark. Still, when I'm near rock art, I carry ochre, and my knife stays close, just in case the walls start whispering again. Our fifth story comes from Jira Balang, a Warora man who faced a terror in the Wunameen Miliwundi ranges of Western Australia during the wet season of 2023. I'm a bushman at heart.
Tracking wallabies, reading the ridgelines, knowing when the spinifex sings, that's in my blood. Born and raised Warora, the land doesn't just speak to me, it raises me. Every scar in the stone, every river bend, every shift in bird call. It's all a conversation I've learned to hear since I could walk barefoot. At 35, I was a cultural educator in Derby, trying to pass on that listening. But the classroom was wearing me down. Council meetings full of rules that made no sense, and kids more interested in TikTok than in sacred lore. I needed to reconnect, not with Wi-Fi, but with country. So I packed light, my swag, my Wimmera, a tin of damper and some tea leaves. And I set off for a Wandjina rock art site deep in the Wunameen-Milliwundi ranges. A place my grandfather had spoken of but never showed me. A place the old people said you don't visit unless you're prepared. The ranges, tall and jagged, with gorges like split time, felt different that season, heavy with wet heat. The air clung to my skin, thick with eucalyptus, red dust, and the far-off scent of rain. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall, it arrives. You feel it in your stomach before your skin. I hiked in at dawn, cockatoos screeching overhead like drunk cousins, the land breathing with every step I took. Out there, even the silence has weight. By midday, I'd found the gorge my grandfather described. High cliffs wrapped in vines, the walls streaked with mineral stains like old blood. At the base, sheltered under a rocky outcrop, were the Wandjina. Tall, pale figures with haloed heads and massive, staring eyes. Eyes that didn't blink. Eyes that didn't forget. I set up camp nearby, close enough to watch them, far enough to breathe. My fire crackled softly. The damper's crust browned, and I sipped hot tea as twilight draped the gorge in violet. I felt alive, the kind of deep aliveness you only get when the land knows your name. "Jira, you're the king out here," I joked, grinning to the quiet. The gorge echoed back my voice, but a little off, like it didn't quite agree. That night, the ranges roared. I woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not thunder, not wind. A low, living rumble that made my swag vibrate. It was as if the whole sky had lungs, and they were exhaling slowly, with purpose. The clouds had gathered without warning, thick and boiling. But it wasn't lightning that split them. It was something else. Pale flashes, too slow, too wide. Shapes curled in the sky like smoke forming symbols. I grabbed my Wimmera, my heart drumming wild. "Just a storm, mate," I muttered, but even my voice didn't believe me. The air smelled wrong, metallic, scorched, like the breath of an engine that had just died. And then I heard it. Jira. A voice, not in the wind, not in my head, but through the land. It came from above, inside, around. A boom that shook dust from the cliffs and made the water in my flask ripple. I flicked on my torch, shining it upward, and there, in the belly of the clouds, faces began to form. Not human, not quite. Huge eyes, blank and white. No mouths, no noses. Just massive, expressionless faces surrounded by haloed rings. Wandjina. The paintings had come unmoored from the rock and were now forming in the sky, towering over the gorge. My skin prickled like I'd stepped into ice water. My hands trembled on the Wimmera. "Okay, Jira, don't chuck a wobbly," I said out loud. But I knew I'd messed up. My grandmother had always warned us. The Wandjina are the law, the sky's law. You don't camp too close. You don't light fire near their face. And you always, always ask permission. I hadn't. Now, one of them descended, a figure of mist and thunder, its head massive, halo burning like a sun behind clouds. Its arms weren't arms, not really, just trailing fog, snaking tendrils that moved with the storm. And again, that voice. Jira. The earth quaked. Rocks tumbled down the gorge. Trees bent backwards as if trying to crawl away. Big on names, eh, Cloud Boss? I croaked, trying to laugh, but it cracked in my throat. The Wandjina's mist reached down, tearing through my camp, ripping my tarp like paper. My swag flew sideways. The fire hissed and vanished. My damper tin clanged off the stone. Then I remembered. Grandmother's ritual. Scatter the sacred dust. Dust of the gorge. Dust of the ancestors. With breath, with word, with respect. I dropped to one knee and scooped up a handful of red dirt, muttering a prayer in Worora. Ngardangari Ngain Yermon, I whispered. Old ones, I'm sorry. I flung the dust into the air. It caught the stormlight, glowing red like embers. The Wandjina reeled, the mist arms pausing. But then it roared again. No words this time, just sound, sound with weight. Rain began to fall, not gentle, not welcome. Rain that struck like stones. I could barely breathe. I threw more dust, my hands raw, my throat rawer, chanting louder, screaming over the wind. The clouds surged, more faces appearing, 5, 10, maybe more. The rock paintings on the gorge wall began to glow faintly, as if illuminated from behind. Eyes flickered, lines shimmered. A misty arm swept down and grazed my shoulder. It felt like frostbite. I stumbled, fell, my Wimmera clattering away. Lousy grab, Foggy, I barked, clutching my arm. The Wandjina didn't laugh. I spotted a ledge nearby, one carved with Worora symbols, law lines, storm paths, circles of connection. I ran for it, the rain blinding me, my voice a hoarse rasp. I pressed my dust-smeared hand to the carvings and felt heat, not heat from sun or fire, living heat, like the stone itself remembered me. My chant faltered, then steadied. The Wandjina surged forward again, but when they reached the edge of that ledge, they paused. The storm clawed at the cliff, but the carvings held strong. I kept scattering dust, even when my palms split. I sang until my tongue numbed, and slowly the mist drew back. Not gone, just waiting. I stayed there all night, curled on the stone, whispering old words. The storm hissed and spun above, the faces fading in and out like ghosts behind curtains. One by one, they blinked out, until only the wind remained. Dawn broke golden, the sky blue and hollow. The gorge looked like it had been bombed. My camp was shredded, the fire pit filled with debris, and the cliffs scarred with fresh cracks. But the ledge I clung to still glowed faintly under the morning sun, its carvings warm beneath my battered hand. I hiked out in silence, every step heavy, the chant still looping in my head like a stuck record. My Wimmera was dented, my swag ruined, but I didn't care. I was alive, and I'd been seen. Back in Derby, I didn't go straight to work. I went to the elders, sat with them, shared what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. Some nodded quietly, some wept. One old man just said, "They know you now. That's a gift and a weight." I still teach, but not just about animals or bush tucker. I teach the law, the songs, the boundaries, the respect. The Wandjina don't live in paintings, they live in law. and they watch. I don't trek alone anymore, especially not near sacred cliffs. The classroom's safer. The kids might tune out, but at least they don't scream your name through the clouds.
But when the sky thickens and the clouds start to stack wrong, I carry dust, and my Wimmera stays close.